hear from a wide range of experts, campaigners, and decision makers. And I'm very pleased to be asked to share my thoughts and co-chair this important meeting. Just to briefly sum up the agenda, we'll be hearing from Louise King, the director of CRAE, to present the findings from the submission, and there'll be an opportunity for reflections from me and any others briefly afterwards. Then Carolyn Waters, the chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, will outline the top children's rights concerns from the EHRC report to the UN and the importance of civil society's role in the UN Human Rights Treaty monitoring process. I'm very pleased to say she'll then be followed by Anmol, a young child rights activist who will reflect on how COVID-19 has impacted the rights of children and young people and talk about her experience of being involved in the last UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the CRC examination. After that, we'll have my opposite number, the Children's Minister, Vicky Ford, who will then reflect on the report and the CRC process, followed by Baroness Walmsley, who will also open up for further comments from the audience before concluding. I'm really sorry to say that due to a prior commitment, and I'm sure a lot of you will be aware of everything that's going on at the moment with Brexit and parliamentary business, I have to leave just before 3:30, but you'll be in the very capable hands of Baroness Walmsley, who will chair the rest of the meeting after I leave. If you can't see the main speakers highlighted at the top of your Zoom screen, you should be able to see the person speaking if you switch to gallery view, and you're welcome to message in the chat if there are any technical difficulties, and I'm sure someone will get back to you with support. Just a quick reminder to turn off mics when you're not speaking, but please do keep cameras on if you can, and don't mind that the meeting will be recorded. It would also be really helpful for us if you could edit your name on Zoom to include the organization that you're from, and you can do this by clicking more next to your name in the participants bar. If you'd like to speak, please use the hand raising function in the participants bar, and Natalie Williams from CRAE will call on you to speak. After all that technical information, I'm going to hand it over to Louise to present the findings of the report. So over to you, Louise.
Okay, well, it's great to see so many of you here today and to join us for the launch of our civil society report to the UN, which is being launched to mark International Human Rights Day, which is tomorrow. So I'm going to be talking about the sort of the key findings that we've come up with in our submission to the UN. Obviously, there's a lot in there, so I won't be covering every single issue, but of course, just because I don't mention it doesn't mean that we don't think it's important. I'm not going to be mentioning child poverty because Caroline Waters from the Equality and Human Rights Commission I know is going to be talking about that. But of course, we know that is a key children's rights issue in England and something that we raise. So just briefly, before I go into the findings, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the report and what it's for. So the report identifies 30 key priority child rights issues, and these have come about after extensive consultation with civil society. The report's been submitted to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and this marks the first stage of the UK's examination on its child rights obligations by the UN Committee, which will be happening in a couple of years. Our submission will inform the UN Committee's list of issues prior to reporting. Now that's basically UN jargon for a list of questions which it will be presenting to the UK government next February, and the answers to those questions will form the basis of the UK government's submission to the UN. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of those organisations that took part in putting together this report, because we certainly couldn't have done it without you. And we're really, really delighted that the report's been endorsed by 90 organisations. And I think that really just shows the commitment of the children's sector in England for the ambition to have full implementation of children's rights. So we're really, really pleased that that's happened. So unfortunately, when we look at the sort of the report as a whole, the main kind of conclusion is the fact that children really are worryingly low on the political agenda. And we see how children's rights have regressed in many areas since the last examination in 2016. And unfortunately, a lot of children's rights issues have been further exacerbated by the pandemic. While there's been welcome progress to embed children's rights across government, for example, there's been civil service training on children's rights and also a template to carry out child rights impact assessments. A key thing that we still have not seen is the fact that it's a statutory obligation to carry out children's rights impact assessments as part of government decision making. And we can see that there has been developments in other parts of the UK, and we're really concerned that England is slipping behind. And I really think this is so important. I know when we talk about CRIAs, it might sound quite jargony, it might sound quite technical, but really if children's rights aren't part of government decision making, then unfortunately, the issues that I'm going to talk about in the report is a result of this. Children really need to be central to when new policies and legislation are being made. So one of the key issues our report highlights is the fact that there's still so much discrimination affecting particular groups of children. Black, Gypsy, Roma and Traveller children suffer persistent discrimination across all aspects of their lives, whether that be part of the education attainment gap, where you see there's a big gap between their achievements of those of their peers. They're more likely to be excluded from school, and BAME children are disproportionately represented across all parts of the criminal justice system. We also see inequalities in health outcomes, particularly for BAME children, especially around obesity and mortality. Yet despite the clear discrimination that is affecting BAME children, we still do not have a cross-government strategy for preventing and addressing systematic racism and race discrimination. And we really hope that the government's new Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities does lead to urgent concrete action. We really can't have another wasted opportunity for really addressing these issues. And we must ensure that BAME children also have all of their rights respected. Unfortunately, our report also shows that children experience violence across their lives and in different settings, whether that be in the home, on the streets, or in institutions. We've seen increasing abuse, including child sexual abuse and neglect in the home. And we've also seen a sharp increase of child sexual exploitation online. And unfortunately, the pandemic has increased this because obviously due to schools being closed and lockdown, children have been spending more time online. And unfortunately, this has been a very bad negative consequence of that. Despite the UN Committee's recommendations made in 2016, we've seen the use of taser and spit hood use on children increasing year on year. And children also experience violence in institutions. And I think it's particularly concerning and also extremely upsetting that children in health, learning disabilities and autism inpatient services are also being subject to restrictive interventions. The report also flags the fact that there's a lack of adequate support for victims of trafficking. And this is alongside the fact that there's been a huge increase in the numbers of children that are being referred to the National Referral Mechanism, which has been increased by up 45%. Our report also highlights the fact that child criminal exploitation is now the most commonly reported type of exploitation, and that particular groups of children are more at risk from county lines, whether that be children in poverty, children with learning difficulties, children looked after, or children excluded from school. And although there's been some progress in this area, unfortunately, we still see far too many times these children being treated as offenders rather than victims that need protection. I'm sure it won't really come as a surprise to hear that COVID-19 has really taken a toll on the mental health of children and young people. And now 1 in 6 5 to 16-year-olds in England have a mental disorder. There's been a sharp increase in sleeping pill prescriptions, eating disorders, self-harm, and the inability just to cope. And children report that they are extremely worried about a number of different things, whether that be exam stress or fear of failure, inequality, and the environment. And it's really key that if we want to address children's anxiety, we really listen to what is actually concerning them. The report also highlights that particular groups of children are also more at risk of having mental ill health. Care experienced and Gypsy, Roma, Traveller children are at greater risk of mental ill health and self-harm. And also there's high attempted suicide among LGBTQ children. The report also raises the fact that there are thousands and thousands of undocumented children living here in the UK, with half having been born here. And these children are in a particularly vulnerable situation. They have barriers to accessing education, they're more likely to have mental health needs and also be at risk of exploitation. And a key problem is the fact that they face a massive financial barrier in terms of regularising their status. The fact that it costs over £10,500 to get a 10-year route to indefinite leave to remain is obviously just beyond the reach of many, many families. And so actually regularising their status is just beyond something that they're able to do. As many of you will know, Brexit requires EEA nationals to apply for EU settled status in order to remain in this country legally. And although we only have 7 months until the deadline, there's still many children who have to sort this out and actually ensure their status is resolved, particularly children in care and care leavers. And unless this is sorted out, then we could be at risk of having another Windrush type scandal in years to come. Now, for adults and professionals who work in this area, you won't be surprised by the fact that we raise a particular issue around the fact that we still take a criminal rather than a welfare-based approach to justice. A key driver behind this is the fact that our age of criminal responsibility is far, far too low in England and Wales, being at just 10. And this has real distressing impact on children and young people, the fact that they can be dragged into the criminal justice system from such a young age. We see over 60,000 children are arrested annually, and though there's been a welcome decrease in recent years, it's still huge amounts of children that come into contact in the police in this way. And we can see that 21,700 children have ended up with a caution or sentence, huge numbers of children each year. Thousands of children are also held overnight in police cells, which is extremely traumatic for them. And of course, there's still high numbers of children in prison. Again, numbers have reduced, which is really welcome, but still we lock up far too many children in unsafe child prisons. Prisons certainly not used as a last resort, as set out by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And we've seen a real prevalence of assaults, restraint and isolation that have risen alarmingly in recent times. And these poor conditions have been really exacerbated by COVID, where we have seen children spending long periods of time locked in their cell, hugely, hugely detrimental to those children's health and well-being. So that's just a bit of a flavour of some of the issues that we raise, and unfortunately it is quite bleak reading. But to be more optimistic, I really want to urge people to make the most of this examination and recognise the fact that it provides us with an opportunity. So in terms of the next steps, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, the UN Child Rights Committee will be issuing their list of questions to the government, and the government then has a year to respond. Civil society also has an opportunity to write another report and submit it in May 2022. And we really hope that you continue to work with us as you have done to this point in terms of putting this report together. Because I really hope if we really work together as a children's sector, we can really push for change and push the government to actually address many of the issues that we have raised in our report in the lead up to the examination and ultimately improve children's lives for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise, for that very helpful presentation of what is a very comprehensive set of questions that the CRC examination of the UK needs to consider as we move to the next stage of the process. What struck me in reading the report is just how many problems for children and young people have been exacerbated by COVID, whether it's relating to children at risk of abuse and sexual exploitation at home, the difficulties of accessing support through schools, the NHS and other services, the challenges in recruiting foster carers, pressures on the youth justice system, child poverty, mental health, the educational attainment gap, health outcome inequalities. We've been going the wrong way on many of these issues since the last CRC examination back in 2016, but they've been made significantly worse by the pandemic, and they're not showing any signs of getting better, unfortunately. And I'm also afraid that COVID-19 has simultaneously exposed the problems with how policymaking in our country takes into account the rights and interests of children. I campaigned alongside many of you here to scrap statutory instrument 445, regulations from the start of this crisis, which dramatically weakens the rights of children in care with an unlawfully low level of scrutiny. There was a child rights impact assessment, unlike for many other important changes that have been pushed through by the government, but very little evidence was provided in the CRIA that supported the conclusion that this dangerous bonfire of children's rights was necessary and in the best interests of children. And sadly, this is just one example of how children have been an afterthought in this pandemic. And you just have to look at the similar regulatory changes around SEND provision and the slow and inadequate response to the need for food support over the holidays for children on free school meals, the digital devices for home learning, fair examinations, and other priorities for children that have just, I feel, not been taken seriously and addressed properly by governments. This builds on many years of not properly examining the impact of policies on children, particularly in the immigration system under the hostile environment, and slashing local government budgets with over £2 billion taken out of children's services since 2010. I used to be a local councillor in Camden before I became an MP, so I saw the impact of the slashing of local government budgets firsthand. And I can say it was very difficult decisions that councillors had to take with nothing they could do because all the handouts came from national government. Something that is sadly emblematic of this lack of progress since the last examination in 2016 is the fact that the UK government has still not incorporated the CRC into domestic law in England. I was proud to campaign on a platform to do this at the last general election, which was nearly exactly a year ago. And I hope that we'll be able to hear directly from the Children's Minister later about why this isn't happening. But as this submission highlights, we need to go far further than that by embedding children's rights and considerations of their priorities in absolutely everything that the government does. That must be a top priority as we plan our recovery from coronavirus so that children aren't once again forced to bear the brunt of the challenge. There's a lot in this report that's worthy of comment, and I'm sorry I don't have longer to talk about it. I could probably go on all day, but I do want to raise what the submission says about the plight of children from BAME backgrounds, and Louise highlighted this quite strongly. The report says that Black children are disproportionately represented in all parts of the criminal justice system and in school exclusions and inequalities in key health outcomes like obesity, mortality, and mental health are worse for BAME children, and that they've widened significantly during COVID-19. I know this figure, but I was shocked once again to learn that half of the child population in prison are from BAME backgrounds. Yet, despite all of this, there's still no clear, comprehensive, and cross-departmental strategy from the government to address the systemic racism and discrimination in the system, or even targets to improve outcomes for BAME children. Many of the recommendations from previous reports and reviews that the government conducted have still not been implemented. This highlights just how urgent a change of approach is needed, and I really hope that coronavirus will be somewhat of a wake-up call for the government about this. I have to leave shortly, as I mentioned, but I'm going to open up the floor for a brief time for any quick points that audience members would like to make or short reflections that they'd like me to take away from the meeting. I'll hand over to Natalie, who should be bringing in those who've indicated that they want to speak. It doesn't have to be a question. It could just be a reflection or a point that you want me to consider.
Yes, we have one already from Kathy Hampson. Kathy, are you able to just read out your question or comment, please?
Yeah. Why does the government continue to just ignore completely all developments in terms of what we know about children's sort of neurology and their delayed development and all the rest of it? and the recommendations of the UNCRC, to which we are supposed to be a signatory, when being challenged on the minimum age of criminal responsibility?
Shall I answer that? Some reflections.
And
I mean,
sure, I can
yeah,
come in after Louise. Why don't you go
yeah.
first?
I mean, I was just going to say that's a really good point, and that's certainly something that we raise in our work around the criminal justice system, because we know so much more about children's brain development now. And so that's definitely something that needs to be taken into account, especially on key issues like the age of criminal responsibility. I mean, we are really pleased that the Justice Select Committee recently recommended the fact that there should be a review. I mean, we think a review is not really needed because the case is already clear, but nonetheless, that's a really strong recommendation from the Justice Select Committee, which we welcome, and we really hope the UK government does take that up, so some of that evidence can be taken into account.
And Kathy, I'll just echo what Louise has said, and I was going to mention the Justice Select Committee and say that, yeah, possibly we don't need another review, because it does mean that you prolong the decisions, but at least it's a strong signal that they feel that something's got to be done. It's also a question you can raise with Vicky Ford, the Minister, when she comes, but what I can do as a opposition MP, so I'm from the Labour Party, is I can raise this in the chamber and bring up the fact that it was mentioned on this call, but also the fact that we've been waiting for a long time for some action to be taken and it hasn't been taken, and I can pose a question in the chamber. We can also perhaps, Louise, write jointly again to the government on this and ask when they think the review will take place and when the conclusions will be done. So maybe I could write with CRAE jointly. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions before Tulip goes?
I think I'd like to speak, if that's okay, Natalie.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Rian from Bernardo's. Not a question, Tulip, just an observation. I think on so many issues, we see a failure to see things through the safeguarding lens on many issues which impact children, trafficking, crime, serious youth violence. I suppose the concern is that we continue to see something that is at the end of the spectrum on enforcement response as a response, as opposed to a response that the individuals, the children. I think that will be potentially a very serious issue for the serious violence bill, and how far we can move the law and guidance along to that safeguarding lens on exploitation, as opposed to an enforcement response against violence, recognising that those involved, maybe children, young people who've been abused and exploited. But that's just one example. But that's something that is preoccupying Bernardo's at the moment.
Thanks, Ren. You're probably aware that I do quite a lot of work with Bernardo, so I'm aware of the work that you're doing around this. Absolutely agree with you. I think we do need to maybe it's push for a change in attitude towards policy making around this, but you are right to highlight it, and Bernardo has done a fabulous job of highlighting it so far. So all I'll do is just amplify your message in the chamber and in Parliament. But you are absolutely right, and I think it does need to be looked through a different lens. So absolutely agree with what you're saying.
We have a question from Peter Green. Peter, are you there?
Yes, I am now, just battling with the technology. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak. Tulip, my name is Peter Green. I'm the chair of a national network of doctors and nurses with a specialist leadership interest in child safeguarding. And we were privileged to contribute to the report. And we're also quite proud because we supported the NHS Youth Forum in submitting their own report to the UNCRC as well. And I hope that's going to get plenty of airtime, because it's great to see children and young people actually being given a voice and express themselves in their own terms. The point I'd just like to ask for your interest in is that, speaking as a healthcare practitioner, it amazes me sometimes that the health issues that trouble children and the inequity of child health doesn't get more attention. In specific terms, the rates of infant mortality in this country enable one to say, sadly, that if all the children who were born elsewhere in Europe in 2017 had been born there, 1,500 of them would still be alive. In other words, the rates of infant mortality are such in this country that we're worse in quite a large number of developed countries, and we therefore lives are being sacrificed because we're not following the same processes in an early infancy as are followed abroad. And if you turn that into a decade's worth of numbers, that's 20,000 children or so who have died probably needlessly because our health system isn't up to the same standards elsewhere in the country. And for the 6th largest economy in the world, that feels to me like a bit of a scandal. Yet it doesn't get very much attention because I think it's actually too painful to talk about. Similarly, the levels of obesity that children endure in this country are far greater than is healthy for them. And if you have got health problems as a young child or an adolescent, which are overwhelming in the way that they can be, you simply don't have the well-being that you need to enjoy your other rights under the UNCRC. I mean, I often refer to the UNCRC as a means to an end, not an end in itself. But there are some rights which really are so important that if they're not honoured properly, then we're simply not doing very much about the bigger picture and the bigger life that children should be delivering. And from a safeguarding perspective, we wind up not delivering fit, healthy adults into the next generation, but more of the same. And it seems to me that that's a substantial societal point. And to hear that echoed in the House would, I think, be very helpful for us all.
Thanks, Peter. You won't be surprised to hear that the doctors and nurses from the Royal Free Hospital in my constituency often speak about the points that you've made and have raised it with me several times. And I do agree with you about infant mortality, which, I mean, I don't know if it's not in the agenda because it's too sad or whether it's just not on the list of priorities for legislators. I don't know, it's hard to say. Or maybe it's something that's not associated with the UK as much as it is for less economically developed countries. But you're absolutely right to make the point. And I have to admit, to my shame, I think I didn't know those statistics in the manner that you've outlined them. I've dealt with several cases that have come to me as a constituency MP, but I didn't know those figures. And you're right, it's something that should be echoed more in Parliament. During the Baby Loss Awareness Week, there was a lot of talk about infant mortality, but it wasn't a topic on its own. You're probably aware there was a few debates on baby loss, and at that time, I think that's the opportunity to kind of shine a spotlight on that. So let me take that away and speak to the Shadow Health team as well about it. In terms of obesity, I actually, I represent a constituency that has kind of affluent parts and very deprived parts in Hampstead and Kilburn, and the obesity rates in the different parts of my constituency are astonishing in terms of the deprived areas and pockets of affluence that I have, and it significantly reduces life expectancy for a lot of my residents. So it's something that I think we need to take more seriously. I think we are starting to take it seriously, but I think there's a lot more we could be doing. But the other thing I'd say, Peter, just to echo what you're saying, I think the mental health of young people has been completely ignored in this pandemic as well. There was always a problem with the lack of resources helping people with mental health problems. There was always a focus on managing what happened and crisis management instead of early intervention. I think that's something that this pandemic has really highlighted as well. I don't know if you want to quickly come back on anything. I'll have to leave in a minute, but I'm very happy to raise these things. We have various means. I'm sure everyone on this call knows. We have adjournment debates where we can raise these issues. We have questions in the House. If you're lucky enough to get selected for Prime Minister's questions, you can ask the Prime Minister a question. You may not get the answer that you want, but you can raise it at least. We have Westminster Hall debates where we can raise questions. And then obviously we have question time for each subject. So whether that's health, education, and I always get to ask a question in education questions because I'm a shadow minister. There's also the option of writing, obviously, and cross-party letters make a lot more impact, I think, than just writing on my own. And lots of the times I will get cross-party cooperation from other MPs if they feel passionately about a topic.
Well, thank you. You've sounded very supportive, and I think that's extremely welcome. I'll happily make sure that we give you any information that may be useful without being overtly political, because we're a collection of experts who know their stuff, and I can always lay hands on information which can help and inform any debate. I think in the context of today's gathering, any sort of raising of the temperature around children in the house at the moment is going to be a good thing, because it's going to be receiving greater attention next year with the inspection. Although I think we need to be doing more than just inspecting, frankly, for the situation of children's health.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time, Tulip.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to head off, but I'll hand over to Baroness Walmsley. So over to you. Speaking of cross-party working.
Thank you very much indeed, Tulip, and thank you for your chairing, and hope you get into your next meeting in time. Now, we're moving on to Caroline Waters, who's chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and she's going to talk to us about her concerns about children's rights.
Thank
Caroline,
you.
Over to you.
Thank you. This is such an important issue, but it just doesn't appear in the public debate often enough. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. It goes without saying that every child matters. We want to see all our children thrive, develop and reach their potential. But as we've heard, that's not the case. Every child has rights, regardless of who they are and where they come from, even during a pandemic. We very much welcome the findings in this report and look forward to working with CRAE and their civil society partners going forward. We were delighted to be able to fund the development of this report. We believe it is vitally important that there is a vibrant and engaged civil society that can generate this kind of evidence, highlight critical concerns, and then work collectively to bring about positive change. As Britain's National Human Rights Institution, a vital part of our remit is monitoring government compliance with international human rights treaties. Most recently, we submitted our own report to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, publishing on Children's Day last month. In our report, we highlighted our key concerns regarding the UK and Welsh Government's performance on children's rights over the last few years, focusing on to what extent those obligations have been met. We raised serious concerns across a wide range of areas, including rising child poverty, widening educational attainment gaps, worsening mental health, the ongoing detention of children with autism and or learning disabilities in inpatient units, and the treatment of children in the criminal justice system. Although much of the focus today, as it was around our own report launch, was on the pandemic, it's worth remembering that all of these issues existed prior to coronavirus, and that all it has done is expose these inequities even further. For example, more children are being pushed into poverty. We know poverty is one of the main barriers to the full enjoyment of children's rights. Living in poverty can have a negative impact on children's health, well-being, education and development. The bottom line is that child poverty will have long-lasting negative consequences. With poverty levels rising, we're deeply troubled by the potentially devastating impact of the pandemic and have called for urgent action. We're also concerned about educational attainment. There's no doubt that children and young people have faced significant disruption to their education this year. We've seen school closures, inequalities in home learning environments that risk accelerating growing attainment gaps for certain groups, particularly disabled pupils, some ethnic minorities, and those who are socio-economically disadvantaged. We highlight several areas of concern in our report regarding the treatment of children in the criminal justice system. We point to rising levels of violence and assaults in the youth estate, the widespread use of restraint, and the disproportionate experience of children from ethnic minority groups, who, given that they make up 50% of the population, is a real prison population, is a real issue for concern. On top of this, of course, the pandemic has meant that children have been locked in their cells for longer. Family visits, education and therapy have stopped. And despite legislation allowing for temporary release, not one child has been released in this way. I hope that together we can use this moment to take forward these recommendations and bring about positive change. We will continue to engage with the UN review process and hope that the government does the same. Now, more than ever, we need a government that listens and learns with us in an open and constructive way. I'm also pleased to mention that tomorrow we will be launching the next phase of our Human Rights Tracker. It's an online accountability tool which can be accessed at humanrightstracker.com. The tool aims to make the UK's human rights obligation more transparent and to support stakeholders' ability to engage with the international framework and to advocate for change. So I do hope you'll all go online and have a look at it. There's no doubt we're living in remarkable times, but it's clear if we don't act decisively now, this generation of children will face the consequences of that inaction for a long time to come. To avoid creating a lost generation of children, action needs to be taken now, right now. All of us here today have a clear responsibility to ensure that the best interests of children are at the heart of decision making going forward. We have to give children a voice. We have to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for all those thoughts, and how appropriate that you ended on that point, because we're now going to hear the voice of the young person. So we're going to hear from Anmol Carr, who is a child rights activist. So over to you, Anmol.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for having me. So I'll just start by giving a bit of brief background about me. My name's Anmol. I'm a children's rights activist. I've been campaigning for over 5 years since I was aged 18 with CRAE on a number of topics within children's rights, and have had the privilege to present our recommendations at the UN in Geneva. I have also recently graduated in law after studying for 5 years, and I'm now looking to qualify to be a solicitor so I can help people further. And I'm here today to voice my opinion and represent the voices of young people in England. So a bit about my involvement in the last examination process as a part of Change It, which is the name of our group with CRAE. So I've been a part of Change It since the inception of it back in 2015. I had the privilege to be involved in the last examination process with the rest of the steering group, which is a group of young people, all with different lived experiences. We researched and wrote the Change It report all about children's rights in England. We spoke to 1,000 children, almost 1,000 children in our research through different mediums, along with bringing together our own experiences and ideas. We sent the report to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, who were checking how well the UK respected children's rights. After reading the report, the UN committee told the UK government that they needed to make some changes to make sure that they were respecting children's rights. And so we presented our recommendations at the UN in Geneva that year. How I've used one of the recommendations from the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child on addressing homeless families having to live in attendees and poor temporary accommodations to campaign for change is as follows. An urgent issue picked out by the UN was the need to stop housing children in temporary houses like B&Bs for a long period of time. We want to make sure that the government listens to the UN committee and children have a right to grow up in a warm house where they feel safe, somewhere with enough room to play, study, and spend time with family. I want to see changes made so that all children have a place to live, where they can grow up safe and healthy in a real home. Given my own experience in housing, it is very important that the change is made so no other child or young person has to go through what I did. We have campaigned in several ways, along with creating a housing and homelessness campaign pack. We've lobbied MPs, I've spoken at events such as this, at the United Nations to attend concluding observations and much more. And I believe through campaigning, and more importantly, by highlighting young voices, that change can be made. I also want to talk a bit about how the pandemic has had an impact on children and young people's rights. It's impacted us massively, and I feel like we haven't been given the platform to have our voice heard. We've been put on the back burner of the epidemic, and we've been blamed for the spread and so much more. There's been little to no support from the government at all, let alone in our country that is meant to be quite advanced, but imagine in other countries where there is a further lack of resources. Young people are still not aware of their rights, whereas Article 42 states that we should know them. And there is also a lack of sense of power and trust in the system. And I believe a lot of issues are caused because of this. It suppresses the voice of young people. even though that this is one of the rights under the CRC to take young people's voices seriously, which is Article 12. There's been a large increase in mental health issues, whether that be with school or because we've had to stay indoors for the majority of this year, in which we may have already had struggles. I can only speak from experience, and I know for me, when I was struggling with homelessness, that actually going to school was like an escape for me. But now that I have graduated, career development and aiming to secure a training contract has been equally as hard and a reason for deterioration in mental health for a lot of young people and young graduates. And I'm sure that there are many young people in the same or unfortunately worse boat. It's sad to know that more people have died because of mental health issues than COVID itself. And a lack of support and genuine care from the government by putting children's rights at the forefront of policy and law can lead to detrimental results. I truly believe that with the incorporation of CRC into domestic law, real improvement to children's and young people's lives can be made. I could go on and on about this, but I just want to end it with this. Wherever there is injustice, and if we are able to, we must stand up for change. And I would urge you to, if you're in the position to, have young people involved in your program, organisation, because we need more young voices in decision-making positions. I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn if anybody wants to continue this discussion, or if there's any way in which I can support you with this. But let's do all that we can to ensure no child has to suffer. Thank you.
Anmol, thank you for that demonstration of how important it is to hear the voice of the young person. And so I'm pleased to tell you, everybody, now that we have been joined by Vicky Ford, who is the Children's Minister, and she is going to give us her reflections on the report. So over to you, Vicky.
Thank you so much, and thank you for gathering together and inviting me to join you and speak to you. Thank you, CRAE, for organising the event and for the launch of your report, which we've read. Every child matters. I'd like to start by saying that because it is so important, and I am absolutely clear that this government is fully committed to protecting and promoting children's rights. We're extremely proud that the legal protection for vulnerable children in England is frequently recognised as being amongst the strongest in the world. And so, of course, I was disappointed to hear some of the messages in the report. As you know, we've taken a wide range of actions to embed the principles of the UNCRC since the last reporting round in 2016, which your report does highlight. I'd like to just quickly reflect on a few of the examples that highlight our commitment to and progress with embedding those really important children's rights. So 3 years ago in 2017, we introduced the Children and Social Work Act, which strengthened local safeguarding arrangements and placed a duty on the safeguarding partners to work together to make plans to keep children safe. And we're pleased that your report acknowledges this act and the positive measures it created. With your help, we implemented guidance and a revised template on how children's rights impact assessments can be used, and children's rights training, which is accessible to every civil servant across all government departments. And we're looking at how we can embed these further, and we're keen to continue working with you on these. This year, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the UNCRC with you and published a report on all the children's rights policies and programmes which we've undertaken across 14 government departments. And last month, the UNCRC was officially extended to Guernsey and Alderley, and through the hard work of the officials across DFE, the FCDO and MOJ. It's another example of the cross-government work that officials have undertaken to help safeguard the rights of the child. And just yesterday, I'm pleased that the Secretary of State announced Dame Rachel de Souza as the preferred candidate to be the next Children's Commissioner for England. She'll be an excellent candidate to champion the voice of the child and push forward the significant progress that Anne Longfield has made to date. And she'll bring her considerable experience of raising outcomes for children into this essential role. Now, of course, the pandemic has had a huge impact on all of us this year, but it's impacted on many children and young people even more so. And during the pandemic, promoting and protecting the best interests of the child has truly been at the heart of the actions we have taken and continue to take. I myself, over the past, what's now 9 months, have attended numerous cross-government meetings and task forces as the Children's Minister throughout the pandemic to represent the children and be the voice of the child on topics ranging from health to food provisions to local government activities. Everywhere, promoting the interests and needs of children has been central to my work. Throughout the pandemic, we've protected the right to education by ensuring that schools remained open for vulnerable children, as well as those children of critical workers. Now, I am incredibly proud that we were one of very, very few countries in the world that kept schools open for vulnerable children. We're deeply committed to protecting Article 28, the right to education, as education is vital, not only for children's development, but also for their well-being. And Anmol just mentioned well-being and mental health. We've consistently prioritized the ability to return to schools for education and well-being. And that's why schools remain fully open to students in September, and over 99% of schools have remained open at all points during this term, including during the September lockdown. We've managed to get 1.6 million pupils back into schools from the 1st of June before lifting the wider restrictions on hospitality and retail. And we've made access to education a national priority. We've also coupled that, in order to address the mental health concerns that were just raised, with the Wellbeing for Education Return Scheme. And this has given schools access to training and support from local mental health experts, so they can support their staff, their children, each other, in making sure that they are aware of the issues and concerns that young people have at this time and the effect that the pandemic has had on their mental health and well-being. We've also continued to support children's social care too. For example, the Adoption Support COVID-19 scheme provided over £6.5 million to support up to 61,000 adoptive families and special guardianship families who were struggling to cope with the challenges of the pandemic. We've given £4.6 billion of funding into local authorities, which has been put in place to support their communities, including young people. Yesterday, I announced a further investment of almost £4.5 million to extend the COVID-19 response programme, which has been run by major children's charities, which includes the See, Hear, Respond programme. And that's reached more than 35,000 vulnerable or hidden children to date. And we've also been increasing funding for the NSPCC helpline so that children who are at risk of harm can be identified and given support. Now, we did make some changes to children's rights, and there was the Court of Appeal judgment. But I think it's really important that we understand that the Court of Appeal has judged that we should have consulted more widely on the coronavirus regulations that we made during the pandemic. It's important that to note that the judgment was focused on the consultation that we carried out, and the court took the view that we should have consulted more widely. However, the court did not rule specifically against the substance of the changes that were actually made. In other words, any criticisms of the decisions we made are hypothetical. We do acknowledge that we should have consulted more widely before making those decisions, just as we would do in normal times. Moreover, the court accepted that we were compliant with our duty to promote the welfare of children when making these changes. You know, at that time, we were operating in the height of the pandemic, and we had to make some very quick decisions on how to protect the very most vulnerable children and young people when services were facing the risk of extreme pressures. And our sole motivation was to ensure that services could continue to protect and support the well-being of the most vulnerable children and young people, should a significant proportion of the social care workforce be unavailable. And that is why we granted certain flexibilities, but as we know, those flexibilities were rarely used, and when used, they were used appropriately. Across education and children's services, the government has made support available for millions of children in England this year, from those happy to be back at school with their friends to those needing extra support provided by social workers or by charities which have worked in partnership and often funded by government. Nothing is more important than the safety of young people, and we are committed to supporting those who are most vulnerable. So in the recent spending review just last month, there was a commitment to a further £24 million to start a new programme to maintain capacity and expand provision in secure children's homes. And we'll also be investing a further £300 million of capital funding next year to support the creation of new high needs places for children with special educational needs and disabilities. We have throughout this period also focused on people who needed support with assistance to food. This included that while schools were closed to most pupils, ensuring that children who would normally have access to free school meals continued to be supported, either through food parcels or packages from their schools, or then by launching the Free School Meals National Voucher Scheme, so which I recall that was £380 million worth of funding directly to families. For this winter, of course, we've announced the new £170 million COVID Winter Grant Scheme, which is being run by local authorities. And the funding for that is clearly ring-fenced, with at least 80% earmarked to go to families, and at least 80% ring-fenced for support with food and utility bills. And that covers the period up to the end of March 2021. Local authorities have received the first block of funding, and it's on top of a 63 million fund, which we also gave to them pre the summer. Another major announcement that I'm so proud of is the expansion of the holiday activities and food programme. And this has provided healthy food and enriching activities to disadvantaged children since 2018 in pilot schemes. But from 2021, the programme will cover the Easter, summer and Christmas school holidays. It's an investment of 200 million, and it's going to be available to children in every local authority in England. It's a game changer for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. I'm very proud that children's rights continues to sit within the Department for Education under my ministerial portfolio, even if the lights do keep flashing on and off in the background. So sorry about that. Children's rights is a cross-cutting, cross-government issue. But it's important that we continue to have a team that represents children's rights in the DFE, while we're protecting the children who is most in need of our support. I don't think that it's correct or would be the right thing to do at this time to suggest that we move children's rights away from the department that is focused 100% on children in every single thing that we do. So despite the work that we've achieved since 2016, we do recognise that strengthening children's rights is a continuous process, and we've always got more to do. And in the spirit of this, I've of course read your report with great interest. As you know, the reporting process to the UN committee's now begun and will be ongoing until 2022, and our officials have already started their preparations for this. So thank you for gathering everybody here today. It is important work, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to join you and to speak at this event. I'm so sorry that I can't stay. I'm off to go and meet the Guide Dogs for the Blind, who've been doing some fantastic work with young people with blindness, but they've also been teaming up with the National Deaf Association to make sure that some of the online learning that many people have been doing this year is truly accessible to all. And that's what I will continue to do as long as I am in this role, and my department will continue to do long after, is always put the most vulnerable children first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. That was very comprehensive, and good luck with your next meeting, which is a very worthwhile one. Now, folks, you will see that we have already overrun, but I have been told I can spend a few minutes just giving you my response to this report. As I mentioned to you, and I promise you I'll be very brief. As I mentioned, I'm a Liberal Democrat peer. What I didn't say is that I'm honoured to be also an honorary fellow of UNICEF. I'm the co-chair of the All-Party Group for Children and also the All-Party Group on Obesity. I think Peter Green will be pleased to hear that. Now, we've talked about the best interests of the child, and of course it should be front and centre, but the question is, how is it embedded? And I absolutely agree with Anmol, and I have been campaigning for years to incorporate it into domestic law, and I will continue whilst I breathe to campaign to do that. What I was very concerned to find last time I looked was that the Department of Education did not have a system for addressing the issues that were raised by the last report of the Committee on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And unless that is all addressed systematically over the subsequent 5 years, then we're going to get really patchwork response to the very important concerns that are raised every time the committee looks at our state party. Others have raised the issue of inequality. I'm very concerned about inequality in health, in education, involvement in the criminal justice system. You know, we have Black Lives Matter. Well, I think we need Black Children Matter. And if we sort out health and care and education and opportunities for young people, we'll improve the quality of life for BAME children and divert many young people of all ethnicities away from criminal involvement. And I absolutely agree with those who've mentioned the age of criminal responsibility. I can tell you that my fellow deputy chairman of the Liberal Democrat peers, I'm one of them, and I have a male counterpart, Navneet Dalakia. He raised a private member's bill to raise the age of criminal responsibility some time ago, but I'm afraid it was not accepted by the government. Another thing I've always campaigned on is abuse and neglect, both in the home and elsewhere, and on child sex abuse. And there were no surprises, I'm afraid, in the report. We still need mandatory reporting, and every time I hear of awful cases, I think if only we had mandatory reporting, some of those cases would not have gone on as long as they have. It's not a silver bullet, but it would certainly help. The whole area of violence against children is of concern. In the home, we need to get rid of reasonable chastisement as a defence against hitting children, as Scotland and Wales have done. It's time we did it. I've raised it in the House before, and I will do it again. On schools, we've really got to ensure that all teachers are trained in safe restraint techniques, not just SEN teachers. Occasionally, it's necessary to protect the child from hurting themselves or other children, but it's got to be done with the dignity of the child and the child's safety in mind. And on the police, we've got to stop using tasers on children, and of course also on people with learning difficulties. That's another thing I've raised in the House. And we've got to reduce restraint and isolation. I'm not going to say anything more about mental health. I could go on all afternoon. The current situation is quite unacceptable. I'm very grateful to the Children's Commissioner, the outgoing Children's Commissioner, for raising the issues of children in care. We need to improve both the quality and stability of placements and get rid of unregulated settings. All settings where the state is the parent should be regulated. But there needs to be more family support upstream to stop children having to go into care in the first place. There was a report done by the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Children that showed that this is often not done simply because local authorities are strapped for cash. They'd like to do that prevention work, but they can't. So there also needs to be more post-care support. It's just not acceptable that so many care leavers become homeless within a couple of years. On child poverty, that's another thing that I would need all afternoon to talk about. Just one thing about education. We've got to ban unregistered and therefore unregulated settings where safeguarding is not uppermost in people's minds. And we've got to reduce exclusions. We've got to stop schools off-rolling children and give more support for those units who try and provide an education for children who have been excluded, unfortunately. SEN children, we need to make it easier for their parents and much less bureaucratic for them to get an education, health and care plan. And there needs to be a system for monitoring that it's been delivered properly. So there's a very quick rush through some of the issues that struck me in that wonderful report that you've done. And I do hope that it's taken a lot of notice of, because it should be. And we will all keep a very careful eye on what the committee has to say and hold the government's feet to the fire in both houses of parliament and across parties to try and make sure that some of those issues that have been highlighted get something done about them before the following 5-year report on the UK's performance. So thank you all. Thank you to CRAE and Just for Kids Law for producing the report. Thank you to all our speakers this afternoon. Thank you for those who asked questions. I'm so sorry we didn't have more time for questions. And as I say, we have already overrun. And I won't take up any more of your time, but just to thank everybody for taking part this afternoon. This is a vitally important issue and we will all keep fighting. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. So nice to see you all again. Bye.
Everyone, bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Samuel.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.